registered. So it's easy for us to track how many of you guys are here, and also for us to not mispronounce your name or call you by the wrong name by any standards, because we're a relatively smaller group. So I'd like for this to be really, really interactive. So it'd be really cool if you guys can switch on your camera. And it's also a lot more like fun for us here. At any point, if you have questions, feel free to just verbally interrupt me. I'm known for being a little bit fast at times. So if that is the case, then just drop a chat message and I will be seeing it. I hope everyone can see the screen right now.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we're just gonna quickly start. Just in case anyone is confused, um, so we have like three people. So this is going to be pretty interactive with a lot of drills. So drills are basically like small exercises that we'll give you. So feel free to answer. The way that you answer can either be via text if you're more comfortable with that, or verbally. We would prefer verbally, but whatever you're comfy with. Cool. So we're basically trying to make debate a lot more accessible. So if you do know anyone who'd be interested in any of our events, and you can always also just register for multiple different trainings we have. We're probably going to have a WCC competition, which is a competition basis this format that I'm talking about in the near future. So feel free to register for that, because that'll just be great experience for you guys to like put in these skills into like active practice. Please make sure you turn on your camera. So Kinera and Abuzer, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing anyone's names. Just turn on your cameras, guys. If you can't, just drop me a text message and that's fine. Um, Cool. So, essentially, I'm going to be taking this session. So you could just look at some of my credits, but essentially, Joyna, who worked on this PPT, is also incredibly experienced. So, and they'll probably be there tomorrow with a host of other judges who will be leading the entire event. So you guys are in good hands. So feel free to ask any doubts that you might have. The first thing I'm going to talk about is what is WSDC, because that's the entire name of the format. There are multiple different formats within debating, but today we're just going to talk about WSDC. So the full form is World Schools Debating Championship. It happens every year in different countries, Panama, Serbia, etc. And it's basically one of the biggest competitions in debate at the high school level. So basically, this format is used by like school debaters all around the world. It's one of the most popular formats internationally. And there's just a bunch of different things to talk about within this. We're just going to quickly move into the teams. So this is a 3v3 format. That is, generally there's a minimum of three people on both teams. You have proposition, who is supporting the motion or affirming the motion, whatever term you prefer to use, who basically just says we should do whatever the motion says, and opposition opposes the motion. That's simple enough. Teams can have between 3 to 5 people. So if you have a 5% team, it doesn't mean all 5 people are going to start speaking. It just means that the other two members are going to help you during preparation time. So generally, like, there are two types of motions, like in terms of prep time. The first is a prepared motion that you get well in advance. So you have like a good week to prepare for it with your team. You schedule meetings whenever to go ahead and prepare for it. The other kind is an impromptu motion that you have a limited amount of prep time for. So by WCC convention, it's 1 hour, but if you join a couple of like pre-WSDC events, which is like preparatory events for the big WSDC, it kind of ends up being like 30 minutes for scheduling things. So you need to be comfortable with the amount of time that you have to prep. So in that case, the two extra people that you have will end up basically just assisting the entire prep, etc. Teams all debate the same motion, so it's not like you're on different motions at any point in time. Generally, it's the same motion. There's a little bit of an exception for out rounds. Out When I say out rounds, I just mean the like ones after the preliminary rounds. So for instance, semifinals, finals, all of those come under like general out rounds. We're going to talk about speaker positions. Like, this is the broad thing. I'll show you guys an image, which is probably a lot easier. So prop one, who is called Prime Minister, short form is PM. Um, Op 1, who is leader of opposition, short form is LO. I think you guys get the idea by now. Then you have DPM, which is Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy Leader of Opposition on Opposition. Government Whip is Prop 3. Op Whip is Op 3. If you look at the arrows, it's a little bit weird because we have something called reply speeches. We'll talk about reply speeches in detail in a bit, but it's essentially just the first or second speaker gives the reply speech. It's not like you have a separate fourth speaker to speak for 4 minutes. It's either like, for instance, the prop reply is given by Prop 1 or Prop 2. Op reply is given by Op 1 or Op 2. Who is giving it is dependent on you. No judge is going to tell you, Op 2 has to give it. Like, you have to decide who is giving it based on different strategies that you can use. So reply speeches are 4 minutes. So the thing is, after op 3, you directly have op reply. So far, it's been prop op, but here it's op, and then prop. The reason for this is that they didn't want op teams to have or at least the speculative reason for this is that they didn't want op teams to have an unfair advantage by having the last say. So they decided to give both teams an advantage. Here you have 12 minutes to speak altogether, like when you add both 8 plus 4, and here you have the last say, so it kind of balances out in terms of advantages. Speech timings is 8 minutes per speaker. There's something called POIs allowed. We'll talk about POIs, but essentially just short questions that you ask the other team during their speech. They're like a couple of rules here, which is just the first and last minute of the speech is protected, so you cannot ask them a POI during that time. So from 0 to 1 minute, and then 7 to 8 minute, you cannot ask them a POI. Reply speeches are shorter, and there's no POIs within them. Let's talk about POIs. So there's just small interruptions, generally phrases the question to the by the opposing team to the person who's speaking. So for instance, if right now you guys had a question and then you ask me that question, and let's assume we're in a debate speech, then I would have to answer the question if I decide to accept your POI. So what you typically do is, and there are multiple ways of asking and taking POIs, which is dependent on the speaker. But if I'm taking a verbal POI, when I'm speaking, someone else is going to just say POI, and I'll be like, yeah, sure, or like whatever affirmative you want to use there. And then they basically just tell you the POI. By the way, please rename to the name by which you registered, and also just turn on your camera, please. Good. So the reason as to why you ask POIs is because you often want to get a strategic concession from them. So what I mean by that is, if they say something that you can use later on to like either disprove their argument or use it in some form of like constructive manner, that's often quite good for yourself, which is why you end up asking POIs in the first place. There are a couple of nuances on how you use POI strategically, but this is the broad stuff that you need to know. How do you accept and answer POIs? You just like don't pause in the middle of your sentence. So if someone's asking me POI while I'm speaking right now, I'm not going to take it because it interrupts the flow in my head. Because what happens beyond a point is just that you don't write everything down on your sheet of paper or your Google document or whatever you're using to prep. At some point you just start writing basic shorthand words that you kind of know what it means. So if you were to just pause and then you look back on your sheet, it's kind of confusing to you at what point you were at. So it's always more strategic to just finish your sentence, ideally finish your argument or whatever you are saying. So if it's framing, finish your framing and then take the POI, which is just like a far better strategy of doing it overall. Answer it within like 15 to 30 seconds. Like, don't go on about it for 2 minutes because there's really nothing that it adds too much more so than your constructive content, because you've spent like literal half an hour to 1 hour talking about the actual content, whereas you're just thinking about the POI right now. So obviously on a strategic level, one is more important because one is just better thought out and it's just more important to your overall round vision, because you need to get out your constructive arguments during that point in time. Um, like like I said, just don't take it during an argument and just do not lose your structure. What we mean by structure here is just that just don't random even if you're done with your sentence, ideally don't take it in the middle of the argument because you have no clue what the POI is going to be about. Like you cannot ask them for the question and then decide whether to take it or not. Like there's always some sort of a gamble that you are taking here. So you ideally don't want to answer irrelevant POIs while making the argument because it makes it so much harder for the judges who are actively like tracking everything that you're saying to figure out what you are saying during that point. Um, so there are different ways of asking and POIs, and it's dependent on what you tell people that you prefer when you are actively like going to start your speech. So right before you start your speech, you often tell them. The first is obviously verbal. So if someone was speaking right now and then I go POI, that's one way of giving the POI. The other is to write it in chat. In chat, you only need to put this much. You don't need to type out the entire question. Typing out the entire question is strategically wrong, and it's also something judges don't appreciate, like not even strategically wrong, like it's just wrong. And it's also strategically wrong because then you're kind of like exposing the question that they might not even answer because they've not approved of your request to ask a POI yet. There are also some which are like hand raises. So the way that it happens on Zoom is using the hand raise feature, and the way that it happens in person is directly through hand raises. In person, you also just stand up and say POI. All of those things are there. Obviously, like the person who's speaking will specify how they want it generally, so you don't need to worry about that to a larger degree. Um, do not badger the speaker. And what we mean by badgering just means that do not keep saying POI, POI, POI. Like that's just wrong and it's just disrespectful as a whole. So a generally good timestamp to have is 30 seconds of a gap between the POIs, and that like asking a POI, and that's quite good. Don't take more than like 2 3 at the max during your speech because then you're just signaling that you don't have content, which is not a very good signal to give to your judge. Some don'ts of POI is just don't go on for ages with your question, like keep it within 15 seconds because you have to be like you have to also respect their time, and you also want them to get done with their best content so that you can deal with it early on rather than the best content coming out in like a deputy, which is DPM or DLO or second prop and second op, or even in the third, rather than just dealing it with it and knowing what it is in first. So that's also an important thing. Just don't blurt out the question. I think I've already talked about this. Follow-up questions are not allowed within WSDC. So don't ask follow-up questions. Wait 30 seconds and then you can ask your next one depending on whether they're going to go ahead and take it or not. Um, sorry. I'm just going to quickly like go through types of motions and then we'll get to fiat in a little bit. So I'm not skipping that, and just so that you guys know. The first type of motion is this house word. In a this house word motion, it's generally a policy motion. So you have or an action motion. In this, you specifically have something that the motion kind of makes you do. So for instance, this house would ban alcohol. The action here is the act of banning alcohol, so that's like pretty intuitively clear. So you just propose or oppose a clear course of action. You have to explain how this would work. I don't know how many of you guys do MUNs, but what I've noticed is when like for like MUNers who are just transitioning to debate start doing debate, the problem is they often are like, we will enact some long name policy and they'll have statuette XXX and XXY. Like you don't have to write out the entire law, you just need to talk about what it's probably going to contain. So for instance, if I'm going to say this house would ban alcohol, I'd probably be like, we're going to give businesses that currently deal in the production and distribution of alcohol about 6 months to convert into another form of business or just close down. We're going to use the money that we probably get, or we're just going to use some degree of our budgets to go ahead and create things like rehabilitation facilities for those who are incredibly addicted to alcohol. We're probably going to spread awareness during the 6 month period of time where we are actively cracking down on the industry, and just talk about all of the bad things of alcohol in order to prevent people from pivoting into the black market. We're going to do things like increase enforcement, that is to say, to prevent black markets to a larger degree and whatnot. So you can describe it that way rather than saying here are the statutes and the legislations that we're going to have within this. So that's a broad way of how policy motions work. There is something called fiat. Um, there is something called fiat within this, which is basically just it gives you the ability to go ahead and talk about how exactly the motion is going to happen. So at any point you cannot contest that this action will fundamentally not happen. So we all know there are some debate motions that are kind of like unrealistic in the real world. So for instance, this house would like even say banning alcohol. Maybe not all states do that, maybe not all countries want to do that. At any point a debate motion is happens all around the world, so it's never just like oh, this only happens in India or wherever the country you guys are from. It's always all around the world, so you need to think of this as in every country where it is viable to do this. So maybe not countries like North Korea, but in most countries where it is viable to do this, this happens. Like this particular action happens, right? So, for instance, the banning of alcohol in the example that I gave probably happens in most places where you can actually ban alcohol. So that's kind of like you cannot contest that. You can obviously contest implementation, so you can absolutely say that the ban and the enforcement of the ban of alcohol is not going to be as good as what side proposition says it is. It is very likely that you have things like underground markets or black markets for all of this. Sorry, 1 second. Cool. So you can obviously contest the implementation of it. You just cannot contest that this action will not happen. I hope that distinction is clear enough. If you guys have a doubt, feel free to just verbally ask me. But largely that's what fiat is, and fiat also lets you kind of dictate the way that this policy is going to happen. Like there is different ways that certain things happen. So, for instance, there are different ways that you can go about banning alcohol. There are different ways you can go about cracking down on the spread of alcohol, etc. Right? So fiat in this particular instance kind of allows you to like talk about how you envision this going. There are certain motions where you just do not have as much fiat, so it's like or you just do not have fiat, so it's more so of like you having to prove why it is likely that this is going to be done the way that you're saying it's going to be done. um that's how it broadly works. Um, so over here, it's very important that you also talk about why this is going to be implemented well. I've already talked about why fiat just does not cover that, and therefore you will have to cover that within your speech. So it's often just good for you to have like a small section of your speech dedicated to explaining here are the incentives and here are the capacities for the actors who are doing this. So for instance, the government to enact the ban on alcohol in a good way. There are reasons as to why people who currently deal in the distribution and manufacturing, etc., of alcohol to comply with this, and they're just going to care about this in the first place. Um, cool. There are like multiple different types of motions. The other one is a this house believes that motion. So basically, a this house believes that motion. There are multiple kinds of this house believes that, but in broadly, it just means that you need to talk about a world where this thing happens and why that would be in net a better world than we already currently have. You have lesser amount of fiat here, and the motion and the burden here is not to prove that the policy itself will be done well, but rather just that this policy is a good thing to do in the first place. Like it is just analyzing whether this is something that is favorable or not. Like you do obviously have a subset of this within this household motions, but it is more so of whether something is intrinsically good or bad rather than whether it has to be reversed, whether it has to like just not be there, etc. So that's broadly this house believes that there are a couple of different things here. So if there's also this house Okay, so there's also this house believes that X should. So X just stands for any like kind of thing there, right? So this house believes that developing countries should establish UPI. I'm just kind of like reframing the example that you have here. So if it's this house believes that developing countries should establish UBI, it's a little bit different there because it's more so on the so in that you have fiat again, so you can model out how this is going to happen. And in case you're unfamiliar with what I mean by modeling, like, do not worry, because um we're just going to cover that in a bit. So largely that's just how it works. The next type I want to talk about is this house supports opposes regrets. These are a little bit trickier because this house regrets is a retrospective motion. What I mean by a retrospective motion is just give me 1 second, sorry, just letting someone in really quickly. Yeah, so what I mean by a retrospective motion is that it is basically a motion that happens in the past. So for instance, if I say this house regrets the creation of ice cream, it means that ice cream as a concept would never exist in the first place. So it would just mean that throughout history you would never have the concept of ice cream, and like it just wouldn't be something that is generally known. So I know that's a little bit of an oversimplified example, but it's just so that you guys are able to understand how it generally works. So for instance, when I say this house regrets, let me take like something simple enough. Okay, so this house regrets the establishment um of the dollar as a global currency. It probably means that there'd be an alternative from the start of the world. The difference here is why speaker joining right now. Okay, cool. Let me try and let them in. Cool. The difference compared to this household motion is also, guys, cameras please. I don't know why everyone's camera except like one person's is off, but it's really helpful for us to have your cameras on, because in case it just feels like something that I'm saying you're not understanding, it's a lot easier for me to like judge how much of an explanation you guys need, because it's completely okay, because I know like lots of you are beginners. So please have your camera on. Regardless, the difference between this and a this household motion is that a this household motion happens in the present. So you already have alcohol in the present, and it's not like alcohol is magically disappearing. It's more so of like you're just banning it now. Like this is different from a this house regrets, because if I say this house regrets alcohol, it means alcohol would never exist from the start. I hope that's like simple enough. This house supports means that you just support a particular like thing. You don't actively take an action here, so there's no need for you to have things like a model. Opposes is the opposite of like supports. So if it this house opposes the ban on alcohol, the flip is just this house supports the ban on alcohol. So cool. um Yeah, so that's simple enough. Basically, what you end up doing is just you compare the two worlds and figure out which world is a better world. So, one where from the start you never had this concept, and then one where you always had this concept. That's just generally how it works. I'm just trying to keep this simple. But if you have any doubts, for those of you who just joined in, feel free to. So here's the drill that we're going to just start with. You can do this either like through text, preferably through voice, but text is also fine in case you're not comfortable with speaking or you just have bad internet bandwidth. Um, it's this house would ban homework in primary schools. Is everyone clear enough with the motion? So this is a policy motion. So this is one where theoretically you would need a model. Right now, you don't need to think of a model. You just need to think of these four questions and then the impact of these four. So the four questions are who does it, how does it work, which is kind of like the model. Like you don't have to have a full-fledged one, just like a simple enough one should be fine. When does it apply and are there exceptions? So when does it apply is just that obviously a policy cannot be enacted overnight, and that's simple enough. So what you will have to do is just think about what is the reasonable time frame for this to start happening and what the alternative is. So if you ban homework in primary schools, what are you going to do instead? Because presumably there's just a bunch of things that op can say on like, oh, but this leads to a learning gap or people are just not reinforcing things at home, right? So you need to think about in the model, is there something else that I can say that doesn't contradict the problems that I've identified? So it depends on what you are identifying as the problem, but still actually solves the issue that you are talking about. Is that clear for everybody? If you have a doubt, feel free to ask. Just give me a thumbs up if everything is okay. Yeah, everyone's cool with it? Everyone understands what to do? Okay, cool. Um, Rajvi, Tanish, if we can have cameras, that would be great. Rajvi, can we have, yeah. Cool. You guys can take like 5 minutes. So we'll regroup at 7:16. Don't turn off your cameras, guys. Just work on this. I hope my screen is still visible because I'm back to Zoom. So in case it's not, let me know. But largely just think about this. Think of these questions. It does not have to be fully fleshed out because obviously 5 minutes isn't enough, but this should generally give you a gist of everything that you need to think about in terms of like very basic stuff. So identify the large problem, like what does this motion think the problem is, and then just talk about how, who, where, when, right? And the impacts of doing this motion. So simple enough. If at any point you guys have questions, feel free to just unmute and ask. If you have a question on everything that I've covered so far, so that's types of motions, and basically that, and POIs, just feel free to ask right now. Rajvi, Kinera, Pihu, cameras, please.
Yes.
If you're having an internet problem or something, just text me. But if everything is fine, just have your cameras on. Because it's also beneficial for you because based on like the way you are receiving content, I can kind of tailor it. Um, s- and that's just more helpful for you guys to understand the general format because this is quite a complicated format, obviously. It's very elaborate, etc. Once you're done, just verbally say or put a text message or just raise your hand and then you can get started with your answer. Alright, guys, we'll take like 2 more minutes. You guys don't need to have like a complete answer. Just have like general concepts and fragments because we can work on it. So don't worry about that. Also, Pihu, camera on, please. Alright, guys. Let's get started. Don't worry, I'll be going question by question, so you'll still have some amount of time to work on it. Who wants to answer the first one, which is what is the problem that we're trying to solve? Just feel free to like start, guys. Don't worry about it. It's fine if like it's not the most perfect answer. Yeah, Rajvi, go on.
Actually, I had a doubt that have you introduced any particular motion?
Yeah, the
So
motion is
yeah,
right
okay, yeah,
above.
I can see it now. Yes, so in this case, the problem would be that you are like banning homework in primary schools. So children won't do homework and they cannot basically um, revise what they have learned today. And they cannot show up their skills,
So
basically.
we're doing prop, so we're doing like banning homework in primary schools is a good thing, and we want to do that. So, what is the problem in current status quo that is caused due to homework, like being
Yeah,
something
okay.
that you can do?
Yeah, so even I have ready for that. So basically, children get pressure of homework also because they already do a lot of extracurricular activities and as well as schoolwork in the class, and they get mentally very strained. So giving them homework um, makes them basically more stressed.
Yep, that's fair.
We
Um,
should clear all the topics in the school itself instead of giving a homework.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. The way you want to frame that is just that there are multiple things that children currently have to do because of the way that the competitive job and university application market works. There's just more people who compete with one another on a like on like a much larger scale. People have great extracurriculars, etc., in order to be competitive within the university admission process. The problem with all of this is that when large amounts of homework are given, and this is non contingent on one subject just having a lot of homework, it's just the sheer fact that there are so many subjects right now that even if it's a small amount from every subject teacher, the problem is it all balloons or snowballs into like a lot of homework. And that often means that children end up just not having things like downtime, which is quite bad for things like their mental stress. So I think that is the right problem to identify. Who wants to answer who does it? Rajvi, since you've already just done it, let's give a chance to someone else. Yep, people go on. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name.
So, who will does this can be national and local educational departments, and we can make teachers to ensure that this policy is working out properly.
Yep. So in a lot of instances, it's the educational board. So for instance, NCRT for CBSE or something similar to that, who kind of enforces this. So they would kind of make it wrong for teachers to give any form of homework. And like schools will generally follow this for things like the accreditation process. So that is generally right. Other than Rajveer and Pihu, who wants to answer when does it apply? Uh, Anish, Kinera, do you guys want to try?
Yes, ma'am. I have written the whole speech, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. You just need to tell me when does it apply.
This applies when, like, the students are reporting to the teachers that they are feeling that they are having problems with this. They are feeling stressed, and like they are feeling stressed, hence they want to stop this homework.
Um, okay. I think I get general ideas. Kinera, do you want to try?
I think this applies in the age gap of between 55 to 11 years, like usually the primary years.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. So generally this happens in primary school. So the small little details of is primary ending at sixth grade, etc., are like kind of irrelevant to this round. But largely it's just that you probably like end this academic year. So when does it apply? As in when does the policy apply? Because that's something you'll have to have within the model. And don't worry, we'll be talking about models in more detail in a bit. So even if you didn't completely understand it, that's completely fine, right? Essentially it's just that you finish this academic year, and from the next academic year onwards, homework will be something of the past, so you no longer just have like homework that's assigned to kids in primary schools. Cool. Anyone want to try what the other side will say? Anyone can answer. Sure, Rajveer, go on.
Yes, ma'am. So in this case, as I said, the opposition might argue that the children will not get time to revise what they have learned today.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
the
think that's
opposition.
fair enough. Like
Yeah,
I think the
which
way you
children?
frame it.
Yeah, and the children will not enhance in their skills, in their writing skills.
Writing skills feels a little bit more niche to me, but I think in terms of like you just don't have as much of an incentive to do things like active recollection when you just don't have homework. So if people are not familiar with what active recall means, it means spaced rep like then there's also something else called spaced repetition. Basically, it's literally just like you doing the same thing a number of times until you're able to like get it. So I think that's generally why most parents will tell you you should write something down if you're not like remembering it over
Yeah,
and over again until you memorize it in your head, just so that you're able to remember it when you no longer have the element of homework. Because obviously teachers at school have to continue doing their portions. Um it's just that you lose out on that aspect, and it becomes harder for kids to like cope up with the syllabus, and because they don't have an incentive to actively start studying, because you need to remember these are primary children. um they're still not at a point where they feel the complete stress of things like boards, etc., or
yeah,
like whatever the equivalent of those big exams are. So they are likely to want to prioritize things like playing, and just other recreational activities that they do, which are not wrong. It's just that you lose out on studying. Like there's some degree of that time that you can put into studying, and that's the way you do homework.
yeah. There's
So
one more
that's,
point.
yeah, go on.
Yeah, so in this case, also like teachers will not be able to analyze the way children write, or they will not be able to judge a child or based on its writing skills, that is writing on its own verbatim. That will be the key issue. That the
um
ma'am will not know the verbatim how a child is writing, and ma'am will not correct the errors of a child. That can lead to
I,
declination of marks in the exam.
I mean, I think I get it. I just don't think that's the biggest thing, but I get it. Let's move on to the next thing then, because we're kind of on a time crunch here. We're just gonna talk about this house prefers motions. How did you have a doubt or something? Um, don't worry about the drills. We'll have more in the like upcoming things, so you guys can definitely answer then. We're just going to talk about this house prefers motions. Here you have two different worlds, right? So for like, okay, so there are two kinds of this house prefers motions. The first is this house prefers a world where, so this means from the start, you remember we talked about retrospective motions, which is just that from the past something changes. Similar to that, if I say this house prefers a world where people do not lie, it just like lie in the sense of saying the opposite of the truth, etc. um it means a world wherein people from the start of time have never lied to one another. So you need to analyze what a world like that would look like compared to the current status quo that we have. There's another that says this house prefers, for instance, rehabilitation to retribution. So, for those of you who don't know, rehabilitation is basically where you kind of try to correct the person. So, for instance, like this is used in like criminal justice rounds a lot. Retribution is more of like an eye for an eye. So, it's where you give things like long prison sentences to people when they've committed crimes, etc. So, over there, you will just purely be analyzing the general values and where the criminal justice system is better off and where you do better for victims, etc., etc. There's a last one that says this house prefers X over Y. Actually, no. What I said was just this house prefers X over Y. That's fine. So those are the large kinds of like this house prefers motions. You basically have to compare the world. We'll do this a little bit later, so don't worry about it. Um, we're going to talk about actor motions. This is one of the last kinds of motions that I have. They're a bunch of like more niche things like this house predicts, but they're not very popular on the circuit, so don't worry about it. Actor motions are basically where you're given a specific actor in the motion itself, and you basically have to emulate their incentives and capacity. So obviously you have different views on certain things, but your actor might have completely different views than you on a certain thing, right? So for instance, if I say this house as okay, so this house is Kenya would legalize abortion. Apologies for the spelling mistake. This house is Kenya would legalize abortion. That's a different debate to have compared to this house would legalize abortion, because here you need to specifically talk about what are Kenya's incentives here and why Kenya as a country should do this. A better example would be this house as a developed country would introduce you as a developing country would introduce UBI. Here you need to specifically talk about why it's so important for the developing country to be able to go ahead and do this. I hope that's clear enough. So basically, like within the motion, you will generally have like this house as X or Y. So you just need to talk about what X or Y really cares about. You just need to talk about why this is something that they ought to do. Cool. Fine. We'll do this drill because I think this is more useful to you guys than the other one. So I actually we're just going to do this on the spot, so I'm not going to give you as much prep time. Just feel free to answer as you think of it, right? The motion is actually worded wrongly, so just take in the new wording. This house as a company would prioritize profits over employee welfare. Um, Let me just try and see if there's some kind of annotation. Okay, this is not going to be very well done, guys, because I'm on laptop, but it's just this house as actually, you know what? I might just type it in Zoom, but it's this house as a company. Okay, I think you guys get the point. I'm not gonna try and do this. I hope everyone's clear on what the motion is. Just give me a quick thumbs up if that is the case. Okay, this is horrible. Yes, Rajvi, go on.
Could you
I'm
please
just
just
typing.
say the first statement like this or supports poses like how?
It's this house as a company would prioritize profits over employee welfare. I'm just going to retype the motion and chat because this motion wording is wrong. So this house as a average company, an average company would prioritize. So this is an actor motion, guys, to be clear. Profits over employee welfare. Cool. We're just going to talk about I'm not going to give you guys prep time for this. Let's just get started. What do we think companies want, guys? Just start talking.
Like, see, companies basically mostly focus on profits over employee welfare. Like in this case, what do you mean? Like they'll first focus on the economic status and not like for the welfare or social or economic welfare of particular employee. Because in this case, the raising funds of company is very important. For example, in food industry, if they don't get profits, they will not be able to buy new machineries, and if they don't buy new machineries, they cannot increase their profits. It's like a whole economical chain. So in
Yeah,
this
yeah.
case,
So
prioritizing profits is very important. It's very significant.
yeah, so I think the latter half of that is getting at the right answer, which is just that without profits, like and does anyone actually want to try? Come on. Kinera, Tanish.
Ma'am, can you repeat?
What do you think companies want? Like, what
Companies,
are their incentives? Yeah.
companies basically want profits because if their company's economical status is bad, then there's no profit. Then there's no like the employer should not be given priority as profits are important. And if the company fails, then that's basically a downfall. Matlab, that's a loss for them. That's
Okay.
why.
Let me ask another question here. Do you think a company can run without employees?
Ma'am, can I answer
No,
this?
No, wait. I just want to give everyone a chance.
Yeah.
So, we'll go around and then at the end you can try it out here. Yes, Tanish, go on.
no, without employees, a company cannot work.
Okay, so what do you think would be a unique reason as to why profits are so important to companies? Kinara, you can also try.
Because if there are no profits, then there wouldn't be enough money left to be given to the employees.
Okay, fair enough. So, employee salaries is dependent on this. Kinara?
Yeah, if we look at it in a different way, then yes, if the profits are more, there can be increments in the salaries and the welfare of employees as well.
Alright, so this is why profit is important to employees, not so much of companies. So I think I'm just gonna like try and say something, and you guys tell me if it makes sense. You know how lots of like big companies have shareholders, like most like bigger businesses, like medium to large enterprises have not just shareholders but also just people who have invested in the business who you need to give back money to. How do we think they get this money? It is generally through like profits. So I don't want to get into the entire way that companies work, but it's generally just you need more money to give back more to your shareholders, and also attract more investment, right? Because if on a portfolio where like really rich investors are just flipping through and they're just seeing you're not making big bucks, they're probably not going to invest in you to the same degree. So that's kind of why it's just so important for a company to make profit. What do we think? And Rajveer, you can answer this one. What do we think companies fear? So, what are things that they don't want
Ma'am, the
happening to
fear
them?
regarding the inflation and deflation a company might have. So in this case, ma'am, if the in data analysis, if the company has inflation, then only it has profits, and if it has deflation, then it goes to loss. And in companies or in business, there is a green zone, a red zone, and a yellow zone and a red zone. So the company fears to enter in a red zone as it can cause a bad impression to a company as well as to the employees. And ma'am, actually in this case, it will have a lot of socioeconomic damage to the country.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so over here it's an active motion. So that is why it's so important to remember the distinction between an active motion and normal motion. Because if this is a normal motion, also it's just like if this is a normal motion that says this house believes that companies, like all companies within a country or like within the world in general, should prioritize blah blah blah. You can definitely see like the socio-economic impact that like profits have in terms of you just being taxed on the profit, etc, is just so incredibly large. But the problem is, A, this is one specific unnamed company we're talking about, but B, you need to then prove as to why this tiny little company, like in the large scheme of things, like if this company we're talking about is probably not a Microsoft, or it's probably not like a Tesla, it's probably more of a medium-sized enterprise. Like it's not incredibly small, like a Kirana store, but
medium
it's kind of
inflated.
like in the middle. Yeah, so you need to kind of talk about why they care about this. So that's why it's so important to remember the distinction between an actor. But I think you are generally right. Like the thing that they fear is obviously economic turmoil, because if you're literally going bankrupt, that's not a very good sign. And but
Yeah.
as a result of that, investor confidence, etc., drops.
Could I give an
Um,
example?
that's fine. We just want to get through this
Yeah.
because there's a bunch of other
Actually, I
things in
have a
the
doubt.
PPT. Yeah, go on.
Mhm. Yeah, and third question, what constraints do they have? So I understand social and economic, but how is it political? Because it completely depends on the political relationship with a politician or with a good ministry. So what are the
Also,
political?
so this is basically just like a set of questions that you can generally ask for any active motion. So this is a little bit different basis the motion, right? So if it's more so of something like this house is Kenya would legalize abortion, which is the previous example that we looked at, over there, political incentives are a lot more important than like economic incentives in comparison, right? So it really depends from motion to motion. These are just some things that you can think about, which is why it is in a bracket where it's like, if this applies, what is the consequence here? If that
Oh,
makes sense.
yeah.
Cool. Um, Kinera, do we want to try answering what constraints they have? What constraints this company has? Or Tanish, either of you. It's fine. It's fine if you literally give any answer. Don't worry about it. This is just so that you guys can also grow. Tanish, Kinera, either of you. Rajveer, I'll get to you in a second. Okay, why don't the both of you just think about what success looks like and let Rajveer answer what constraints they have. Cool?
Yeah, should I answer?
Yeah. What constraints do they have that you're
Ma'am, so
thinking?
yeah, so first and the most important constraint is giving salary to the employees at their given time. So, for example, if you're giving a monthly salary, so in first case, we don't understand that we need to give them salaries back on that time. If we don't give them salaries back, that can lead to various social conflicts to the company that can basically downframe the company. So I don't remember the name of the company, but a company delayed to pay a salary to the employee. So what happened was it was posted on social media, and that basically it depressed the company. So now let's talk about this is a social constraint. Let's talk about the economic constraints. So in this case now, as I said, about red zone and green zone and the yellow zone. So in this case, if the company enters the red zone, means it is going to deflation. It's going at loss, and if it goes at loss, then as I said, it can be bankrupt. And if it is bankrupt, then the company like will get demolished. And if it gets demolished, then there will be no profit source um, for the person, and it can decrease gross domestic product and per capita of the country. Like,
Yeah, that's fair.
because for example, if you see, I'll give an example. It is not true, but just an example, fiction example. For example, TCS is a very big company, and it goes in a loss, but it goes in very deep loss, like deflation, and like lakhs of employees work in TCS, and TCS is a major part of the GDP and the per capita. So now, if if you know that India comes in top 100 per capitas, but in top 5 GDPs. But now, if these major companies go down, then it would affect the GDP and per capita in a long term. It will be a long term effect. And if all
Yeah,
these
so
small companies go, yeah. So
So again, the long-term effect thing is like for the country itself is kind of like slightly irrelevant because the motion specifically says an average company. So it's probably not as big as like TCS per se. More so if like the large supermarkets that you probably see within your city or town or village or wherever, right? But I do get the point here. Kinera and largely all correct. Kinera, do we want to try what success looks like?
Yeah, so success would probably look like achieving all their goals, accomplishing them, and avoiding possible risks. Um, and also paying the employees on time so that they don't lose good people, and like wanting to go to profit more over than going to loss because they don't want to lose their investors mostly. That's what I think.
Yep, fair enough. We're going to quickly walk through speaker roles. So here are the things that you should be mindful of in first speeches. So that's first prop and first op. Setup is basically where you talk about what the world looks like. You talk about what problems there are in the current world. So status quo is what we mean to say in the present or something like that, right? So anytime I say status quo, it just means what's happening in the present. So you can talk about what does this currently look like, what does the world currently look like, what does this policy look like, what would the world then look like, right? So for instance, a world without alcohol is a lovely place, and then you just talk about all of the features of that world, and that's kind of what you do in setup. There are a bunch of other things. So you basically also talk about big recent events throughout your speech. So like giving things like examples is kind of important. You cannot use the internet during WCC, to be clear. Like during preparation time for WCC, you can only use it to do things like share a Google document at best, but nothing beyond that. So that's generally what setup is. It's basically why you're just trying to describe the way that the world works. You after setup, you want to kind of do like a roadmap where you're basically like, here are all three of our arguments. You should generally aim to have three arguments. We're going to talk about models. Like, I know we've talked about it like an extensive bit, and it seems like you guys generally understand how it works. But I just want to quickly go through it. For like, there's just a bunch of WH questions to ask here. So, what is the policy? Is the main part of the model. So that's what you guys said, right? What does banning homework look like? That's just here. Who is the person who's enforcing the model? The national and local educational departments in the homework motion. Who is the target? Obviously, like students who are in primary school in that motion. When will the model be implemented by? Is easy enough. Like what time frame are we looking at, etc. Where will the model be applied? This is what I meant like by debate assumption. And how will it be implemented? Is uh similar to like that's also another part of the model that you have to answer. Largely same thing for first op two. Like you can also just use things like national and international trends um within your entire speech. Let's talk about deputies for a bit. What you basically do during DPM and DLO is essentially just you the most important thing that you do is you kind of refute the PM and LO. This is a law speech where you can bring in completely new arguments. So for instance, like in a third, you cannot bring in new arguments. You can bring in new weighing, new analysis of like pre-existing arguments if you want, I think, but you cannot bring in a whole new argument. So it's quite important that you get the new parts of analysis, or sorry, the new parts of the case out within this particular speech. You want to do refutation to PM or LO. So if you're DPM, that's refutation to LO. If you're DLO, then that's refutation to PM first and then the DPM. And the one extension is the kind of like unique argument that you have that is non-contingent on what you guys already ran in like PM. And so basically it's kind of like a good half and half speech. So half refutation. Like not half refutation, most of your speech is kind of like refutation. Like there's a balance to strike here. Don't care about this timestamp thing, it's just incorrect. But largely just government whip and op whip just spend their entire speeches refuting. We'll talk about class structure, so that's probably going to make the way that you refute a lot clearer. Weighing is also important. It's not matrix, it's metrics, but that's fine. Weighing is also important. You basically have, so the purpose of weighing is kind of different from the purpose of a form of rebuttal. Um, did anyone want to try telling me, Kinera or Rajvi, do you want to try telling me what it means to refute something, or what do you think it means? It's fine.
Could you
Yeah.
please repeat?
Yeah, Raju.
Refuge.
Refute. So rebut something.
Could you repeat the question?
What do you think it means to rebut something? So
Um, yeah. So rebut basically means to oppose someone. Yeah,
yeah. Okay.
to oppose someone
Kinera.
by using some factual points.
Okay. Kinera, do you want to try?
Even I think it means to
Okay.
oppose or like not agree with what is being said by the
Yeah, so under refutation, you do not agree with what is being said. So you have logical points to kind of say, hey, this is not how it happens. Here's why it happens the way we're saying it's happening, right? Under weighing, you kind of take the best case scenario. Sure, maybe their argument on something is true. The problem is our argument and the end impact of the argument that you are making is just far more important. So sure, maybe they prove that a couple of rich people just get less rich, and that's a bad thing. But the problem is the amount of people who are currently vulnerable in society right now are just in a far larger degree and scale, and in net are more vulnerable, that you have to care a lot more about them. So here you are conceding, and it's not conceding, it's more like, even if I had to like say that this was true, here's why we still win. So that's kind of how weighing works. There's a bunch of different weighing metrics here. So like on impact, on vulnerability, on likelihood, on scale. The scale and impact are basically the same thing. On the time frame, so whether it happens in the long term or in the short term, and it's kind of round dependent, but they're like sort of intuitive. A clash is basically where sometimes debates get really messy. If you have an argument on economics and then I have an argument on economics, it kind of gets very, very messy at that point, because it's like both of them are basically trying to get to a very similar endpoint. You just have completely different ways of reaching it. And that's where the entire disagreement happens. So over here in clashes, what you want to end up doing is talk about. Okay, let me try and pull up the format. Basically in clashes, what you want to do is you basically just talk about, here's what they said as their argument, and here's what we said. Here's why they're wrong, and here's why the responses to our argument on economics, for instance, is still right. So you basically want to collate all related content under one umbrella, so it's easy for everyone to just be able to go ahead and track your speech. That's basically how clashes work. We've covered setups. So introductions are just like 15 to 30 seconds at the start of any speech. Ideally basis the content you're going to talk about. So it's kind of weird if you have an introduction that's like, the economic devastation that this policy creates is horrible, and like other rhetorical flourish stuff, but then your arguments are a principle, and then um here's why pop culture becomes, I don't know, like here's why international relations gets a lot worse. Like they're not very directly linked. So it's always better to have an introduction that's more directly linked than anything else. Um So definitions are kind of like part of setup, basically any unclear words within the motion. So if I say this house would give more funding to grassroots sports, you kind of need to talk about what grassroots sports are. And you want to define them as like local, like on a smaller scale, etc., etc. You have lots of talent within there. They don't have current funding. All of those things are things you want to say. Um, this is largely just a bunch of things you should avoid. And burdens you don't really need to know. They're just large things that you want to prove within a motion. Stakeholders are anyone who is affected by the particular motion. So obviously in the education motion that we talked about, the stakeholder is students, like primary school going students, right? So basically you want to think about these people when you're creating arguments, because it is on the basis of that your argument kind of makes sense, right? So before you start the entire process of I need three arguments though. You want to think about, okay, so who are all the people who are affected by this motion? In what way are they affected? And is there a way I can derive an argument from this? So that's generally how stakeholders work. Counterfactual, like I said, is just what is the alternative? So if I don't have homework in schools for primary children, what am I replacing that with? Is it longer school hours, or is it just that we won't replace it with anything and we're fine with taking that trade-off? Like, you need to think about this during prep, because that's when it makes sense. In this house with motions, I just want to add, you can also just have a counter model, which is another way of doing like some said explicit thing, right? So if the entire point is we think alcohol is bad and it shouldn't be there, what are the other ways that you can do things like regulate alcohol? Um, in order to make sure its like perverse effects aren't as spread without incurring the harms that a ban has. This is generally an argument structure, really dependent on you, as long as it has a clear title that it's trying to prove, which is the claim. Multiple reasons for why it's true, or a warrant, and impact is just why is this argument even important. You just need to keep asking why until you finally get to the end point that you want. You need to be very logical and just do not depend on things like statistics. So you saying 30% of the world is blah 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 is not going to automatically prove your argument. So it's quite important that you keep that in mind. Um just a couple of like final do's and don'ts here. It's just signpost clearly. So what I mean by signposting is, if you have like five reasons for something, you don't want them to get too jumbled up in one another. So you want to be like, here's the first reason, here's the second reason, here's the third reason. Way impacts, we've covered this. Don't contradict your team. So if they're saying X, make sure you maintain X and don't go Y happens when Y is directly conflicting with X, and engage with the opposition. Don'ts are like fair enough, which is just that don't overdefine motions, don't add not new material but new arguments and whips, don't rebut while you're just asserting things, and just don't be you don't overprove things, but at the same time don't underprove things that actually have to be proven. So I think that is all that we had for today. So thanks so much for joining in and staying until the end. Tomorrow you'll probably have drills with multiple judges.